Welcome. In this explainer, we're going to explore an ancient mystical framework, but not as a history lesson, We're going to look at it as a really practical metaphor for presence-driven leadership. We're going to dive into what it really means to master the matter of our lives, of our circumstances, by first getting a handle on our own internal state. So let's start with this question because honestly, it frames everything we're about to cover. We usually see our problems as these things we have to fight or push through or just overcome. But what if that nagging issue on your team or that roadblock in your big project, what if it's actually an invitation, an opening to a totally different, more profound way of seeing things and operating in the world? Before we can really engage with the world out there, we have to start from a place of inner clarity. The foundation for mastering any external situation is first building an internal foundation of sincere, honest acknowledgement of what is. Okay, so the framework we're exploring gives us this concept called hold. Now, the power of this idea is that it has this incredible dual meaning. On one hand, hold means splendor, like majesty, but it's also rooted in the word for acknowledgement, or hoda'ah. And what that suggests is that true splendor, real strength, it doesn't come from pretending or posturing. It comes from the simple, powerful act of just acknowledging reality exactly as it is. It's the bedrock of sincerity. And this, right here, brings us directly to a core principle we talk about a lot: internal authority. See, this isn't about being the boss or having power over others. It's about being anchored in reality. It's that ability to look at a situation, whether it's good or bad, and see it clearly, without all the distortion from our own ego or fear or just wishful thinking. That sincere seeing, that is the absolute starting point for everything else. All right, let's build on that. Once you have that foundation of sincerity, we can start to adopt a new kind of leadership archetype. Not the warrior who conquers everything with force, but the physicist who masters circumstances through a deep, deep understanding of their substance. The central metaphor for this whole archetype is this prophetic image of a leader riding a donkey. Now, this isn't about humility in the way we usually think about it. In this kind of symbolic language, riding something means having mastery over it. So this leader has total command of the physical world. The real key to the metaphor is understanding what that donkey represents. And this is where it gets really amazing. The Hebrew word for donkey, chamor, shares the exact same three-letter root as the word for matter or substance, chomor. So the metaphor is incredibly precise. To ride the donkey means to master the very substance of reality, the raw material of all our challenges and all our opportunities. So what does this all mean? Well, it leads to this really striking conclusion from the source material. To master matter, to ride that donkey, a leader needs the mindset of a great physicist. They can't just react to what's happening on the surface. They have to understand the underlying laws and the principles that are governing the whole system they're a part of. But believe it or not, the metaphor goes even deeper, like all the way down to the subatomic level. This connection between the leader, the donkey, and matter is actually encoded in a specific number, a number that points to the fundamental building blocks of reality itself. And that number is 248. So let's take a look at why this number is so significant in this whole framework. Okay, so this number has a few really cool layers of meaning. First, if you use gematria, which is a system where letters have numerical values, the word for matter, Homer, adds up to exactly 248. Second, this number is actually mapped onto the 248 elementary particles that are hypothesized in physics. For a leader, this points to something huge: the importance of getting to the primordial matter of an issue, of understanding it in its raw, formless state before it gets all hardened into some impossible problem. So we have our foundation of sincerity, and we have our goal of this physicist-like mastery. But how do we actually make the breakthroughs? Well, this brings us to a really counterintuitive idea for growth: the power of the loophole. Okay, so check out this seemingly wild claim from the great mystic, the Baal Shem Tov. He said he could find a contradiction, a flaw, in any theory presented to him, no matter how smart the person was who came up with it. Now, on the surface, that sounds like pure arrogance, right? But it's not.
What he was really doing was pointing to a universal principle. Every system, every theory, every single strategic plan contains what you could call a zero point or a loophole. It's not a mistake to be ashamed of, it's an inherent opening, a doorway to a higher, more complete level of truth and understanding.
The Hebrew word for contradiction, stira, actually reveals this. Its root doesn't just mean contradiction, it also means to tear down and concealed. So a contradiction isn't just a problem, it's a concealed point that allows you to tear down a limited structure so you can build something new and more whole in its place. And you see this everywhere once you start looking. In science, a loophole in one theory is what gives birth to the next better one. In physics, you have a black hole, this point of apparent nothingness that might actually create new universes. And in our world, as leaders, that persistent nagging problem, that's often the very place where the potential for real innovation is hidden. So let's just pause here for a second and reflect on that. What's your loophole? What's the contradiction or the paradox in your work that you just keep running up against? What would change if you stopped seeing it as a failure and started looking at it as a concealed doorway to something totally new? This all leads us to our final integrative piece. How do we put all this together into a framework we can actually use? Well, it all comes down to uniting two fundamental energies, chaos and order. On one side, you've got what's called the lights of chaos. Think about a brainstorming session just filled with these incredible, unbounded ideas. It's super powerful, right? But without any structure, it can just become overwhelming and go nowhere. Then, on the other side, you have the vessels of order. This is the clear agenda, the meeting rules, the sensitivity to make sure everyone is actually heard. It creates productive relationships, for sure, but on its own, it can sometimes lack the energy of true innovation. And here is the crucial point. Effective, presence-driven leadership is not about choosing one of these over the other. It's all about integration. The goal is to hold the high-energy lights of chaos inside the strong, flexible vessels of order. This is the very essence of choosing responsibility over just being reactive. So here it is, the path of integration that really brings everything together. First, we start with that sincere acknowledgement of what is. Second, we use that clarity to identify the loophole, the real opening inside the challenge. Third, we consciously bring the structure of vessels to contain and direct all that chaotic energy. And that leads to the final step. We create a new, more integrated order. So I'll leave you with this final reflection to take into your week. Where is there a situation right now that's just bursting with chaotic energy? Maybe potential, maybe conflict? And how can you, as a leader, provide that calm, clear vessel of order, the structure, the process, the deep listening, that can hold that energy and transform it into something truly productive and new?